Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with another section of Benny's Bats for today, Friday, August 14th. The idea of the Benny's Bats section is we try to go over every pitcher that's on the mound, figure out what their weaknesses are, and then figure out which batters on the other team profile to do the best against them. We got a large 15-game slate today, so let's get right into it. First guy we're going to talk about is Johan Flande, pitching for Colorado at Coors Field today. Right-handed bats are hitting .271 against him with 4 home runs and 22 innings pitched. There's a couple guys that you can look at on that San Diego team. The one guy who really stands out against left-handed pitching is Jed Gyorko. He's been batting in the 5-hole lately for San Diego when they play against a left-hander. He has a .354 WOBA with a 156 ISO number and limited at-bats. He was hurt a little bit earlier in the year, so he doesn't have a huge sample size, but he is somebody that you can definitely look at. Matt Kemp has also been heating up, so I think he's a popular option today too. The only problem is this San Diego offense isn't all that great. They did have a big game the other day where they scored a bunch of runs, and they are playing this game in Coors Field today. But I just don't know if I feel like you should have a lot of San Diego bats in your lineup. I know it's Coors Field. I know it's Flande, who's a little bit of a gas can, but I think they're going to be very over-owned in tournaments. In your cash games, I do think they make a lot of sense to use some of these guys, especially some of the cheaper options. Remember, everybody's been using the Coors Field premium, so a lot of the sites have priced these guys up. If you're playing on a site where their price hasn't really moved, I definitely think it's a viable option to have some San Diego Padres in your lineup today. Gyorko is my favorite. I do like Kemp as well. I'm not as big a fan of Justin Upton. I usually like him better against right-handers. For some reason, it feels like that's where he hits all his home runs. But again, I think any of those guys could be decent options today, as well as some of the cheaper guys if you need a salary saver to fit something in. Excuse me. Martin Perez is the next guy we're going to look at. He's a left-hander that pitches for Texas. Right-handed bats have been hitting .333 against him in limited innings pitched this season. But even looking back in seasons past, right-handers has been the way to go after him. He goes up against Tampa Bay. There are a couple guys on Tampa Bay that absolutely mash left-handed pitching. Evan Longoria is one of those guys over his career. Even though he had a slow start to this year, he now has a WOBA up at .395 against left-handed pitching with an ISO score of 180. You also have Logan Forsythe, who is one of my favorite salary-saving options today. Going to be my second base option on just about every site tonight. He has a .404 WOBA and a .324 ISO number against left-handed pitching. Bats clean up for Tampa Bay and has been absolutely smashing left-handed pitching all season long, including most of his home runs this year. So if you're looking for a second base play today, I think Logan Forsythe is definitely one of those guys that should be towards the top of your list and that everyone should have some exposure to in cash games and in their tournament rosters. Next guy we can talk about is Adam Morgan, left-hander for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's at Milwaukee's Miller Park today. Right-handed bats have hit .296 against him with 6 home runs and 34 innings pitched. You got to look at a guy like Ryan Braun today. .404 WOBA, 256 ISO number. You know, he's 6 of his last 8. He has a home run, not yesterday, 2 days ago, he had a home run. So Braun is really starting to hit the ball well, and he's doing very well against left-handed pitching. Like we said, .404 WOBA, 256 ISO. Those are some pretty elite numbers, and his price is not overly expensive. I think he's only about $4,000 on DraftKings. He's probably about the 10th or 11th, I think, most expensive outfielder on $4,000 over on FanDuel. He's about the 10th or 11th most expensive outfielder over on DraftKings. So I definitely think that he's another one of those guys that you want to make sure you put in your roster today. Let's see. We're looking on from there. We're looking at a guy like Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly is a .263 batting average to left-handed bats and a .319 batting average to right-handed bats so far this season, with 8 home runs and 34 innings pitched to right-handed bats. That means that you got to like a guy like Nelson Cruz. He did get banged up the other day. I think he's still listed as day-to-day. But if he's in there today, his .402 WOBA and 266 ISO number make a lot of sense. The other guy who I would look at is Franklin Gutierrez. Gutierrez has been great lately. He's put up a couple games of, like 6 to 10 points on FanDuel in the last couple days. Price is still pretty cheap. I think he's only $2,800 on FanDuel. And whenever they go up against, a weak right-handed pitcher and he's in a game, he's been a guy who's been smashing out some hits. I don't think they're going to have him too high up in the order today. Usually Seth Smith hits in that 5-hole, and you're going to have guys like Cano, Seager, and Cruz in front of him. But if Cruz is out, I think Gutierrez is definitely the guy who plays for him. And the way he's been swinging the bat lately, I think he's somebody that you can look at. Next guy we'll talk about, Willie Peralta. Peralta has allowed left-handers to hit 283 against him with 7 home runs and 35 innings pitched. And right-handers are hitting 300 against him with 3 home runs and 34 innings pitched. So you can basically stack up this game. You can look at those Philly bats. Again, it's a good ballpark, Miller Field. Peralta's a guy who struggled to both right and left-handed bats, and he's going up against the Phillies offense that has been absolutely on fire lately. So I definitely think you can look at guys from all aspects of this game. You got a guy like Jeff Francoeur with a 370 WOBA and a 246 ISO number. A guy like Maikel Franco, 363 WOBA, 215 ISO number. Ryan Howard, 348 WOBA, 242 ISO number. He does very well with his power numbers and lefty to righty matchup. So I think he's another guy who's in play. And then you could always look at a guy like Cesar Hernandez if you need a cheap option. He's still only $3,300 on DraftKings. And remember, if he gets a walk or a hit, he steals a base and he scores a run, that's 10 points right there. That's 3 points per $1,000 of salary. That makes him a great value guy for both your cash games and your GPP rosters today. So you guys know how much I love Cesar Hernandez. I've been riding him for a couple weeks right now, and I'm not about to try to get off him right now. So Cesar is another guy who I think I'm going to have in some of my lineups tonight. I like on DraftKings how he's second base and shortstop eligible because you're able to fit him and Forsythe in the same roster. Saves you a lot of money, lets you get some big bats or some big pitching, and does give you huge upside on a day like today with the matchups that these two guys have. Matt Cain is the next guy we can look at. Left-handed bats are hitting 333 against him. Right-handed bats 291, 6 home runs and 36 innings pitched. So he has not been very good so far this year. Bryce Harper, the one guy who stands out. The game is in San Francisco, not an easy place to hit home runs, but Harper has that kind of Barry Bonds power from the left side that it doesn't really matter. I think you can see him put one in the drink today. He has a 474 WOBA with a 343 ISO number. One of the most feared hitters in the game. Obviously, he's not on the roll that he was earlier in the season, but he's definitely still somebody worthy of your consideration and worth paying up for if you can afford him, especially in your tournament rosters, because I don't think he's going to be overly popular today, and I think he always has that huge upside. Let's see. We got Danny Duffy going up against Los Angeles today. Right-handed bats have hit 270 against him with 10 home runs and 77 innings pitched. The only guy who really stands out is Mike Trout. He didn't have a very good game the other day. I actually had him in the Fantasy Feud qualifier. Came up a little short because he didn't do much for me until the extra innings where he got a single and a base on balls. But again, he's one of the best hitters in the league. He's the only guy who really profiles well on that Los Angeles Angels team against left-handed pitching. So if you're going to use any Angels today, that game is in Kansas City. Kaufman's not the greatest hitter's park. Anybody who you want to use today, I think Trout would be that guy. Again, like Harper, I think he's going to go pretty low owned and he has huge upside. So as a tournament play, I definitely think he's a decent option if you can afford him. As I was saying, Fantasy Feud is still running their qualifiers to their big championship tournament. They're like the one site left where you can still get a chance for a huge score. I think there's 14 seats left out of 40 for their $500,000 championship. And tonight they're running a $215 qualifier over there with only 100 entries. So if you haven't signed up for Feud yet, make sure you get over there and sign up for an account. Use the promo code CURVE when you do. You'll get a 100% deposit bonus up to $500. And you'll also get a free $25 from the Roto Curve site. So we'll actually be covering about 10% of your buy-in today if you do happen to put some money in over there and go into that $215 tournament. Plus, you'll get a couple bucks back after the tournament goes off from your bonus. So it's going to be a pretty good deal for you. If you haven't tried the site out yet, get over there. I really like the way they do it with the 3 starting pitchers. The salary structure is a little different, so you really got to, dig through and find those, gems if you really want to put together the kind of roster that you can make on some of the other sites. So let's see. Moving on from there, the next guy we're going to talk about is John Lamb. Lamb is a left-handed pitcher going up against the Dodgers. So you're going to get the Dodgers right-handed platoon going in there today. Lamb struggled a little bit with right-handed bats in the minor leagues, and this is his first major league start today. So you got to look at guys like Kiki Hernandez, who has a 505 WOBA with a 358 ISO number, which is just absolutely huge against left-handed pitching. He's been hitting in the 2-hole lately. He might even lead off today or hit in the 3 spot against the left-hander, but I definitely think he's somebody who's going to be in play. Most of the sites have him pretty cheap because he is a platoon player. So, he's definitely somebody that you guys want to consider. Same thing goes for Scott Van Slyke. Scott Van Slyke has a 393 WOBA with a 180 ISO number. Last year, he had a home run about every 13 at-bats against left-handed pitching. So Scott Van Slyke against left-handed pitching is something that's real. It's been around for a while, and it's been something that DFS players have been exploiting for a few years now. If you can get him at a cheap price, which I know on DraftKings, he's like 2,800. I think he's 2,700 over on FanDuel. So, if you can get this guy into your lineup, he's going to save you some money, and he does have some really good upside today. The other guy against left-handed pitching is Yasiel Puig. Puig's starting to heat up lately. I mean, if you think about it, at the beginning of the year, this is the guy that season-long players were drooling over, wanting him on his roster. He got banged up a little bit. He struggled a little bit. He got dropped in the order. But it feels like lately he's starting to hit. His WOBA is 359 against left-handers. He has a 224 ISO number. He can steal a base. He can hit a home run. He can also do something really stupid like get picked off trying to go first to third on an infield single. But again, that's Puig. You just got to deal with some of that stuff. That he has the explosive upside, and if his price is cheap, I think he's somebody that you can consider. Let's see. Alfredo Simon is pitching today. Left-handed bats are hitting 309 against him, 12 home runs, 71 innings pitched. He goes up against Houston. The only guy that really stands out on that Houston team to me right now is a guy like Jed Lowry. Preston Tucker is the other one based on numbers, but Tucker hasn't really been all that great lately. But if you can get Lowry in your lineup, he's been playing third base, but he's listed as shortstop on most sites, which is good because shortstop is a tough position to fill. And Lowry's a switch hitter from the left side this year. He's 571 WOBA with a 480 ISO number, obviously in limited at bats because he missed a good part of the beginning of the season. But if you can get a guy that's, a lot cheaper than some of the top options like his teammate Correa or Troy Tulowitzki, if you can get a guy who has those kind of numbers, I think it's definitely worthy of a flyer today. I don't know how much I love him in cash game unless he's really cheap, but for your tournaments, I see no reason why you wouldn't want to use this guy. Trevor May is the next guy we can talk about. 290 batting average allowed, 3 home runs in 48 innings pitched to left-handed bats, 278 batting average, 5 home runs in 46 innings pitched to right-handed bats. So as much as I hate to say it, I think you could actually stack up this Cleveland team today. I do think they're, they have a lot of guys who are in decent spots. Again, the good thing about stacking up Cleveland is they don't have a lot of expensive options with some of the guys they're throwing in the top of the order. Guys like a Jose Ramirez, who's been a very popular second base shortstop option as a salary saver lately. But the one guy who does profile the best here is Michael Brantley. 387 WOBA, 169 ISO, hits third for that team, can drive in runs, can score runs, hits for average, hits for power. And again, he struggled a little bit earlier in the year, but he's come alive lately. So I think Brantley's probably that one guy that you really want to look for. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Jared Weaver and his 85-mile-an-hour fastball. 270 batting average allowed to right-handed and left-handed bats. So this is another guy who you can stack up against. And he has allowed 16 home runs, 9 to lefties, 7 to righties so far this year. I think Chris Davis is in a good spot. 370, Chris Davis with a C, 370 WOBA, 299 ISO number. Even a guy like Manny Machado, who's cooled off a little bit lately, but has a 385 WOBA and a 232 ISO number, even though it's a righty-on-righty matchup. Like I said, Weaver. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, we're talking about Weaver is going up against Kansas City. The one guy on Kansas City that I like, scratch that stuff about Davis and Machado. I'll hold off on that for a second. The one guy that I do like that's going up against Weaver is Eric Hosmer. Hosmer's been hot lately. He's got a 398 WOBA with a 197 ISO number. He homered yesterday. He's got a bunch of hits in his last few games, a couple home runs to go with it. So the one guy I really like against Weaver is Hosmer. But again, with that Kansas City team, you can still get some pretty cheap bats in there. Guys like Sal Perez and Alcides Escobar. Weaver's not a very good pitcher. So if you wanted to stack a whole bunch of Kansas City bats up against them, again, he's not a guy that has strikeout potential, and they're not a team that strikes out anyway. So he's going to rely on his defense to get him a lot of outs today, and I don't know if that's really going to work. I think he's going to get knocked around a little bit by the Royals. Those guys we were talking about, like Machado and Chris Davis, they do have a good matchup, but they're going up against Hank Bassett. Bassett struggled with left-handed batters. He hasn't pitched a lot of major league innings, so we had to go back to his minor league numbers. Left-handed batters has been a struggle. That's why we really like Chris Davis. Also, as I said, Manny Machado is in play because he does hit well righty on righty, but I don't think he's a huge option today that I really want to have a ton of. Chris Davis is probably the guy I like best in this game, although, I don't know if I'm really going to be using a lot of Orioles today, but I do think they're in a good spot against Bassett. Next guy is Bartolo Colon. Left-handed bats hitting 307 against him. Right-handed bats hitting 271. 8 homers to lefties, 10 homers to righties. So again, he's another guy that you can look at guys from both sides of the plate against. He is pitching at home in Citi Field, so that's always a downgrade because that's a very good pitcher's park. Even if you have a great offense and a great matchup, there's been pitchers who've gone out there and just held them to 2 or 3 runs, which doesn't sound like a great start, and it's probably not a place I want to start Bartolo Colon. But if you're only going to get 2 or 3 runs in a place like Citi Field, is that really a place you want to use a lot of Pirate bats? And that's what you got to think to yourself when you're looking at this game. Andrew McCutchen stands out on numbers, righty on righty, 389 WOBA, 229 ISO. And Jung Ho Kang, who's been heating up again lately, 363 WOBA, 154 ISO. He's been batting cleanup, getting a chance to get a lot of those RBIs in there. So he's another guy I think that you can consider as well. Moving on from there, we're looking at Tom Kohler against St. Louis. Left-handed bats are only hitting 235 against Kohler, but they do have 13 home runs and 65 innings pitched. The one and only guy that I would use from this game is Matt Carpenter. Carpenter, 382 WOBA, 225 ISO against right-handed pitching. And as we have been said, this guy has been on fire. He's got like 7 home runs in his last 12 or 13 games, something like that. He's been leading off, so he's getting that extra at-bat that, you really want to get out of a guy like him. And, I mean, he's still doing what he always does. He's getting hits, he's getting on base, he's scoring runs, and he's putting up solid fantasy points every single day. I think he's a cash game option every day. I still don't think he's a GPP option. He's on a power surge, and that's great, but it's not really what he does. Again, he's made me look like a fool the last 2 weeks for saying that about him. But again, my cash game rosters have been outscoring my tournament rosters because he's been on them all. So if you want to use him in a tournament, I'm not going to stand in your way. But remember, he's not a huge home run hitter. He's not a guy that's going to hit, 7 home runs in his last 50 at-bats all the time. If he did that, he'd wind up with like 50 of them on the season, and that's really not something that we've ever seen him do. Again, though, he is, starting to come into his own and get into his prime as a player, so maybe the power was just something that was the slowest to come along. But he is one of my favorite players in all of baseball, and I think he's a really solid option to use for daily fantasy today, too. J.A. Happ, left-handed pitcher, right-handed bats hitting 287 against them. 11 home runs, 84 innings pitched. On that Mets team, you got some decent right-handed bats now. You got a guy like Cespedes. Wilmer Flores is still there, 376 WOBA, 234 ISO. He's another guy that you can look at. But again, this game's in Citi Field too, so I don't know how many Mets bats you want to put in your roster either. I'm not a huge fan of Happ, but you don't have to be a great pitcher to put up a decent score and to limit an offense in Citi Field. Mike Montgomery, the rookie left-hander from Seattle, is pitching today. Right-handed bats are hitting 224 against him with 7 homers and 61 innings pitched. I don't love a lot on that Boston team. They don't hit left-handed pitching very well. But the one guy who stands out a little bit, shortstop option, Xander Bogaerts, 408 WOBA, 108 ISO against left-handed pitching. So he's the one other guy I think could be in play on that Boston team. Ivan Nova pitching for the Yankees against Toronto at Toronto. This is not a good spot for Nova. Even though left-handed bats have been the ones to smash off him with the 295 batting average so far this year. This is Toronto at the Rogers Center against a pitcher who's a little bit of a gas can. So I think all the usual suspects are in play, even though it's a righty-on-righty matchup. It's not like Nova is great righty-on-righty. He is much better. His batting average is in the low 220s, I think, against right-handed bats. But I still think that this Toronto offense is good enough that they can do some damage against them. You got a guy like Josh Donaldson, 384, 259 ISO, 384 WOBA, 259 ISO. Joey Bats, 384 WOBA, 302 ISO. Chris Colabello, 384 WOBA, 181 ISO. You got Tulo leading off. If Edwin Encarnacion is in, even guys like, whether it's Russ Martin or Diana Navarro, even a guy like Justin Smoke who might be in there DHing. All these guys are in play. That Toronto team just mashes from top to bottom. And, again, I don't think Nova's been pitching particularly well, so I don't see him shutting them down today. It's the best offense in baseball for a reason. They got David Price on the mound, so they're going to be, amped up to, at home. They're going to be amped up to knock the Yankees, who are, a game behind them in the standings. As a Yankees fan, I'm a little bit worried about this game tonight. I'm not going to lie. Let's see. We got Julio Teheran. Left-handed bats have done the best against him. 295 average, 9 home runs, 63 innings pitched. He has been tough on righties this year. So even though Wellington Castillo and Paul Goldschmidt have some pretty good numbers in righty-on-righty matchups, I don't know if I love them today. But I just wanted to mention to you that they're both over 400 WOBAs. They both have pretty solid high ISO scores. But again, Teheran has been pretty good against right-handed bats, so I don't see them as having an easy matchup today. The guy who makes the most sense to use would be David Peralta. He did leave the game the other day. He is listed as day-to-day, so if he's starting and he's not hurt and he's batting cleanup, I mean, he's been about as hot as any hitter in the league lately. He's driving in runs left and right from that 4 spot in the order. So he's somebody you can definitely look at. He has a 388 WOBA and a 239 ISO against right-handed pitching. So again, with a guy who struggles against lefties and a guy who hits right-handed pitching pretty well, he makes sense if he is in the game today. But I don't know on his health status. You're going to have to check on that first. Let's see. We got Alex Wood, who's allowed about a 300 batting average this year to right-handed bats. That means a guy like Todd Frazier is back in play. Frazier has a 405 WOBA with a 404 ISO score. Now, he was 2 for his last 31 4 games back. He had gone 2 for 31. And then in his last 3 games, he's now 7 for his last 13. He's got a home run, a couple extra base hits, a couple RBIs, a couple runs scored. So it looks like he's finally getting back into that groove after he was slumping and struggling after the All-Star break. His price is just absolutely a steal on just about every site. I think he's down to about 4,000 on DraftKings. I think he's 3,100 on FanDuel. I mean, this guy has struggled to the point where every one of these sites has really, really dropped his price. And I think today is the matchup with him starting to hit where, you know, you want to hop back on. I mean, we always say that playing daily fantasy, you know, it's like playing the stock market and you want to buy low, you know, when these guys are low price, you want to buy stocks that are low that have a lot of upside. And Frazier in this matchup, with the way he's been hitting lately, has huge upside and a really, really, really cheap price. So I think Frazier is somebody that you definitely want to look at no matter what site you're playing on, because you're getting a discount over a guy like Donaldson, who's probably going to be pretty popular. And Frazier actually has a better matchup on paper. And like I said, he's starting to hit again. So he's broken out of that 2 for 32 slump that he was in. And I think that he's going to be one of the best plays today. You can also look at a guy like Marlon Byrd, 382 WOBA, 240 ISO number. He's somebody that you want to consider as well against a guy like Wood, who really struggles with right-handed bats. You could even look at some of the other guys on the top of that order, but I don't love the ballpark, so I don't think I really want to stack this game. But again, you could throw a lot of right-handed bats at this guy. You could put a guy like Phillips in there. You know, even Votto's not bad in lefty-on-lefty matchups. So, you know, there is some room to play around here if you do like Cincinnati. Nate Carnes is pitching for Tampa Bay today up against Texas. He's in Texas, so it's a tough hitter's park, but Carnes has actually been pretty good this year. His biggest struggles have been left-handed bats who are hitting 254 against him. You got a guy like Prince Fielder who has a 404 WOBA with a 157 ISO. A guy like Sinshu Chu, 367 WOBA, 212 ISO. He's been batting second lately for this Texas team, so I think he's somebody else that you could put in play. I'm not a huge fan of Mitch Moreland, even though his numbers are looking good. He had a really good stretch earlier in the year where he was smashing home runs and driving in runs left and right, but he's been pretty cold since then, so I don't really love him today. Last guy we're going to talk about is Tyson Ross going up against Colorado. Ross is actually pretty good. Left-handed bats have hit 257 against him, though, so he is a little bit susceptible to to getting hit by left-handed bats. He doesn't give up a lot of home runs, though, so I'm not expecting any huge games here, but I do think that Colorado has a lot of left-handed bats that they're going to throw at him, and the game is in Coors Field, so it's a huge negative park switch for him as well. Cargo's the guy who stands out the most. He's been on fire lately. He's got his WOBA up to 424, his ISO up to 325. He's been smashing home runs left and right, even in tough matchups and tough ballparks. So I'm not going to argue with anybody who wants to throw him in the tournament. I don't know if I would use him in my cash games today, but he is the guy who profiles to do the best against a guy like Ross. You could also look at a guy like maybe Charlie Blackmon, 374 WOBA, 193 ISO. He can steal bases. He can hit home runs. If he's in the lineup and he's on top of that order, you know, he's another guy that you can look at. And that pretty much wraps it up for the bats that we're looking at today. I like Jamie Garcia against the Miami team today, so I'm not using any Miami bats. I also like Robbie Ray against that Atlanta team, so I'm not using any Atlanta bats. Ubaldo Jimenez, I think, is a sneaky option going up against that Oakland team. So Oakland guys are pretty much off the table for me. You could look at guys like Reddick and Vogt, but we talked about how they've been struggling. So I don't really want to force those guys into my lineup until they start hitting a little bit. And right now they're just not hitting. And Ubaldo's been really, really good at home. So I think there are enough reasons to stay away here. Kluber against Minnesota. I'm not targeting anybody against Kluber. Keuchel against Detroit. Not going against Dallas Keuchel. David Price against the Yankees. The Yankees have hit Price well in the past. But again, he's been looking really, really good lately. And this is a big game for Toronto at home. I just feel like Price is going to show up today. I don't know if I want him. Again, if you want to do it in a tournament to be, contrarian, because I think Price is going to be a highly owned pitcher today, you can stack up the Yankees bats, but it's not a game that I have any surety that anything good is going to happen. So I'm staying away from targeting guys against Price today as well. Again, if you want to take some flyers, remember Chris Young against left-handed pitching is a thing. A-Rod's been smashing left-handed pitching, and Teixeira with the home run power is somebody who could be in play too. But again, don't say that I recommended this. I think there's a lot of volatility to it. Would completely only be a tournament option if you wanted to try to roll that way. And the last guy is Max Scherzer going up against San Francisco. It's at San Francisco, great pitcher's park. We'll have to listen to see who Josh likes best of all these guys. But I can tell you that San Francisco at home against Max Scherzer is not a spot that I want to be targeting any bats against. So that pretty much wraps it up for all the guys that are on the mound today. Again, today is Friday. There's a lot of big tournaments going on. That qualifier, the 215 qualifier, is still live over there at Fantasy Feud. And I just want to give a shout out to everybody that's over in Vegas right now at the DraftKings Live Final. Good luck, guys. That's a lot of money on the line. I know I'm going to be watching. And if I have to make a pick, to be honest with you, I'm going for my buddy Beep on the Jeep. I think he's ready to take something down. He's been having a huge year in baseball this year. You see his name all over the place. So I think he's going to be my pick to take down the money. I know he's not the chalk, but he should be the way this guy's been playing this year. So thank you guys for joining us over here at Benny's Bats on RotoCurve. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at RotoCurve or at BennyR11. Make sure you get over to RotoCurve site, sign up for an account, start earning your curve points. And as always, stay classy, DFS.